Welcome to this episode of spooky tales of supernatural strangeness and weirdly wonderful goings on, all from Steve Nallon's Ghost Stories. This episode, The Oath of Aesculapius. Oh, I'm so excited to talk about this because I'm really interested in the inspiration behind the story. So, how did you get the idea for The Oath of Aesculapius?
Well, I was reading this this collection of ghost stories, and there's a story in it called "They" by Rudyard Kipling, and I came across this line. Right, the doctor was a man of some humour, but I remember he claimed my car under the oath of Aesculapius. Now, I had no idea what the oath of Aesculapius was, so I looked it up. Essentially, it's the Hippocratic Oath. And it's, which goes back to ancient times. But it did occur to me that that would be an interesting potential ghost story of a doctor claiming a car, commandeering a car. It turns out, actually, there's no legal right for the police or doctors to claim your car.
Okay.
But I just thought it was an interesting concept. And I went on reading and it's one of those stories where the supernatural becomes a healing force in the story. Now, I've written the ghost stories, and there's people get their face eaten off by rats and slit their own throats and all the rest of it. But I just thought in the collection it would be nice to have a supernatural healing story. And interestingly, Rudyard Kipling, his daughter died at the age of 6. And he wrote this a few years later, and biographers have basically said that's the story is part of his own healing. And he talks about what he calls the imperfectly informed narrator, and that's basically where you're witnessing something but you don't really know what's going on, and that's an element as well in the story. So that's where the inspiration came from.
Really, to dig deeper into your story itself, beyond Rudyard Kipling and the story behind the story.
Say there's sort of two stories behind the story, because the Oath of Aesculapius really is part of a tradition of two stories, and they're both urban myths. So what you have is the vanishing hitchhiker, and that has become quite a popular urban myth. And the story goes that you meet somebody on the highway, pick them up, and the hitchhiker asks you for a gift, something like a scarf or a coat, because it's cold, and you very kindly give them the scarf or the gift, and then next time you look on the back seat, they're gone, and it was always a ghost. And this is one of the modern urban myths. And the other urban myth, which is in some ways a lot older, is the haunted highway. And this goes back to Dick Turpin and Headless Horseman. But I think what all these sort of hitchhiker stories, ghosts on the road stories are doing, it's playing with the fear of the stranger, and that is a fear that we all have. And by definition, the person on the road is going to be a stranger. From a supernatural point of view, it works both ways, because the driver could be a ghost or supernatural, or the hitchhiker could be, the supernatural. And I think there's a film called The Hitcher. It's not a supernatural story, but it's a slasher story, and that's one that really does deal with the sort of the fear of the stranger.
Yeah, and I think with that, I maybe even put the film Steven Spielberg's Duel with that as well. In the case of you don't know who's following you, you're not aware of what their intentions towards you are, but obviously your intimation as time goes on is that it's not good. And like you say, it has become a very common trope, hasn't it?
Yeah, and I think one of the best ones is certainly one of the most famous ones is the Twilight Zone, the hitchhiker episode of the Twilight Zone from 1960, and it's a classic in a way, because if you've never seen it, then I don't want to spoil it for you. But there's one of the most famous lines in it is, "I believe you're going my way." And who's the ghost and who's the supernatural is one of the questions in that story. And interestingly, it was written by a lady called Lucille Fletcher, and it was originally, I think, a radio play from the 1940s, but then it got sort of turned into one of the classic, Twilight Zone episodes. And I wanted to include in the collection an after dinner story format. There was so many formats of the Victorian stories begin with an after dinner setting by the fireside, and there you have a nice picture, I think, of John Hurt by the fireside, and Christopher Lee doing the candlelit M.R. James routine. The importance of the flame, and within my story, the importance of the flame becomes very important within the tale itself. But what was interesting about the after dinner side was that it allows comments. So you can interrupt the story and say, "I don't believe that. I don't believe that part," or "I don't believe that part." And it's a tradition that really comes from the upper middle classes, I think, and M.R. James. So M.R. James used to do the to read his stories by a single candle. And I've known people who say that their prep master at school used to invite them to the rooms and then read them a ghost story in that tradition. And I thought, therefore, the people in the club would be, well, the sort of David Camerons of this world and the Boris Johnsons. And then I read about the Bullingdon Club, and look, there they are. They all are looking very young, but very pleased with themselves and pompous. So
pompous being the word.
I had already made. I thought, well, if that's going to be the basis of the people listening to the story, then they're ready-made characters.
I find it fascinating how you've got that cast of characters together in this story, and it did
they're
kind
vile.
of like
they're vile people.
Yeah. I'm glad you said it.
No, they are, and I found one of the there's a bit of dark humor in it, and the jokes they tell are really unpleasant. And but I come from a Catholic background, and at primary school we were told about the act of contrition, and if you have an act of contrition, you can turn your life around. And there's in the story, and it's not revealing too much to say that the people that he picks up on the road are supernatural, they're ghosts. They help along that act of contrition. But he has the man who's never named in the story, never named properly anyway. He is the one that has got a duty that then follows, which I won't talk about right now, because that's almost the last line of the story.
Now is the part of the show where we're going to have an extract reading. So tell us a little bit about what you're going to share with us from the story.
Well, the man, he's never named, is on the road. Something unusual is up ahead, and he's got to make a decision as to what to do.
Our friend Mouse interrupted my ghost story. Why do ghost story writers make the best lovers, eh? Because they always put in a mysterious twist at the end. Laughed Mouse, enjoying a joke he had told many times before. The rain was coming down in stair-rods, I continued, and As you know, there are many dangerous bends on those old country lanes. One especially tricky corner is a hellhole for accidents, and so when I approached it, I wasn't that surprised to see a figure waving me down to stop, which I did. It was a middle-aged man like ours in dinner jacket and black tie, except, of course, he was soaked to the skin. I thought, well, if he is a highway robber, he is at least wearing his best. The first thing he said to me as I lowered the car window was, "I'm a doctor. It's my wife. There's been an accident. We need to get her to a hospital. I know a route you can take." I'm usually a good timekeeper. I even left home very early in the afternoon because I had planned a get-together with a friend before our dinner. But with the traffic chaos and now this detour, that meeting was looking less and less likely. I'll be honest with you, I listened out for any other cars coming. Oh, why did it have to be me? Couldn't someone else do it? But it was odd because as I thought about it, there hadn't been any cars on the road for the last half hour. And that was very strange because if the M40 was closed, then why weren't the back lanes busier?
Hello? He's here! What? Oh! Look at this! Where are you going?
But we're going to pair a film with your story, and I kind of went back and forth on the film choices for all of them, and people might go, how does that link to that? Well, in this case, the film chosen, as you've just seen in the intro, is Dashcam. Now, I did interview the writer of Dashcam, so I had a little bit of a inside knowledge of the development and intentions of it. But the main reason I chose it was this idea of a passenger completely changing the course of your life, the supernatural side of it. But the main reason being, and I don't think I knew this until we really started digging into your story even deeper, is that I found the character of Annie in this film, who is the main character, I found her quite objectionable. And
everybody did, I think.
Yeah, I think everybody who met her in the film did. And I remember saying that to Jed Shepard, the writer, and he was like, "Well, she's like my best friend," and and I was like, "Oops." But I think I kind of admire that about the film. It's not as easy to get on with as the previous film, Host, which I absolutely love. I think is a 10 out of 10 film. I absolutely love it. It's a very much Annie's film. And if you find Annie hard to spend time with, then it's not an easy film to watch. However, I do think it's really interesting and of that time, post-COVID, social media usage being up, political things, which kind of I think echoes a bit with yours as well. There's a moment in there with her refusing to wear her mask and wearing her red hat. And I'm not the most political person in the world, but I was like, wow, this kind of marries together quite well. What were your thoughts when you watched it?
Well, no, you're picking up on that. You're absolutely right. She wants to break the rules, and they are in my story. The it's a private room in a restaurant in Soho, and they want candles because they always have candles, and they break the rules, and they don't care about the rules of that are imposed by society on them. And it's the ultimate American libertarian. Nothing fundamentally wrong with libertarians, but if the only person you care about is yourself, then you've got no connection to your community. But going back to your point about Annie being unpleasant, yeah, she's very unpleasant, and I think that's one of the best things about the movie. I think.
Yeah. On second watch, I think I got that.
Well, you've got this really interesting character, and the problem, I'm not going to blame him, but there's there's an element of the people brought up on Robert McKee and story theory, and that you've got to have a likable character, an empathetic character, otherwise your movie won't get made. And I don't think that's necessarily true. And I didn't worry about her. I mean, I didn't. I've listened to reviews that said, "Oh, I stopped watching after 5 minutes because she was objectionable."
Right. Okay.
And I didn't find that. And but it's an interesting point that you make about the stranger that you pick up, and you can't get much stranger than the person that Annie picks up. I mean, that's
no,
she
no. Yeah, speaking to Jed, and he was saying that him and Rob Savage, when they sat down to do this, they were like, yes, it's a great idea, but we're going to make something that all the fans we've made from Host probably won't like. It's
a good job that he didn't just copy Host or do Host 5.
Yeah, exactly, because people would criticize that, wouldn't they?
Yeah. And I mean, I read somewhere that he said, I wanted to splatter blood all over the screen. Well, he certainly did that. And I want to turn the amp up to 11. Well, he certainly. I mean, it's a very visceral is a word that people always use about horror movies, but it really is very visceral. But one thing that I realized watching it, and how another connection with my little tale is that in an after dinner tale, as I said earlier, that the people listening can comment on it and interrupt and say you're talking rubbish. And what I really like, I mean, this is why it's a really special film, is you've got the comments. And it's like a choric commentary on what's going on. And I think Rob has said that the blood is on the screen, but the plot essentially is in the comments and the way people are trying to interpret it. And I was fascinated by the idea that every single comment was not arbitrary. He'd worked out, and the writer, the character arc of the people who were making the comments. Now, I hope people are not offended by this, but Dashcam is a nerd fest, really, because you can actually, if you want to, you can freeze the screen and look at every single character and work out who all these characters are. And I was doing that a few times because I thought I've missed that comment and it was really funny and I want to go back. So it took me ages to watch it. And maybe what I should have done is just watch it in one go, because it's got a slight unity of time in the sense that she's
very similar to Host in that sense. And I think maybe those two films definitely caught the zeitgeist of that particular moment in time. It'd be interesting to see what that team comes up with again, if they're to work together again or separately, just because it kind of connects more when a lot of people are doing those things around the same time. Like, I feel like I watched Host right at the time of the pandemic, and there was, like you say, there's all these little moments, whether it's something popping up on the screen or a message, and the same with Dashcam, that almost plays to the modern audience. So instead of checking their phone during the film, they can watch a film where someone's checking their phone.
Their generation are the ones that are doing things that the previous generation didn't, and that's partly the nature of the medium, because it's on it's like literally on a dash cam, but also I think bits of it are on a mobile phone. But he understands the tradition, because he pitched it apparently as House of the Devil in a moving car.
Right.
So
yeah, that works.
Why not? Right. Well, I don't know if you've seen it properly so far, but here is my Scott Brooker T-shirt with the image of the
An original,
the two doctors on the T-shirt. He's a wonderful artist, is Scott. But what he tells me is that he has to base his image on actuality. So, I mean, here we can see the inside of the car. So he found, I can't remember who it was now, but he found this wonderful car that was owned by a friend and took a load of pictures and from all sorts of different angles. And this was the angle that he chose. You can't really see that much through the windows, but here's the road. Here's a picture of the road that he based it on. And he was, Scott is, you know, a bit of a perfectionist, and there's a few images he's done, and he's started again because he didn't like them. With this one, this was the original version, and what you can't see is the glow round the two characters because it wasn't there.
Yeah, you have to look closely, but yeah, I know what you mean.
Closely, but and we had a chat. He said, "Do you mind me revealing that these are the supernatural characters?" I said, "Look, it's it's a story about not a hitchhiker in this case, but meeting somebody on the road and blah 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 blah, and it's clear that the teller of the tale is alive. So let's just assume that people are going to guess that they're ghosts. Certainly the people in the after dinner setting realize that they're pretty ghosts from the word go. So I said, don't worry about that." And it's and there's hints of the accident in a little bit of the hint of the accident, and a little bit of the sort of ethereal glow that happens. I love it. I think it's a really nice.
Yeah, I mean, nice as you know, as we, there's so many wonderful pieces of art related to your book, and as people find their way through, even on the back cover, that there is so much to pore over. And the art is something that really stands out because, Scott has this wonderful pedigree and, such a creative background that you guys have clearly worked so closely on these that it is what Steve Nallon sees in his mind when he wrote that story.
Well, Scott's very good at sometimes I said to him, what's the image you want to use? And he's told me, and I said, that's exactly the image I wanted you to use. I can't tell him, I can't tell him which image to use because it's sort of his choice, but we have, and there's a little triangle in the image, a little red triangle, which I won't reveal too much about it, but that is a key part of the story. And to say too much would be to reveal what happens in the story. But
often what frustrates is when I look at a book and it's just kind of a very quick sketch, and these are fully realized. And I think that you could frame these, you could frame these pieces,
or put them on t-shirts.
I'll put them on t-shirts. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes. Soon to be available in all good t-shirt shops. So the next part of the podcast, we're going to discuss a story pairing. We've had a film pairing, but there was a classic tale that fit perfectly with this story. So this is your department, Steve. You've got much deeper understanding of literature than I do. Tell us, what story have you chosen to go with the Oath of Aesculapius?
It's a very short story, and it's in this one. It's in this book, which is Roald Dahl's collection. Now, Roald Dahl read 700 ghost stories.
Oh, wow.
And he said most of them were terrible. So the one, no, he said they really are. So, but he's chosen some really this. If you've never sort of sat down and read a load of ghost stories, this is a really good book to collect. And it's by a man called Richard Middleton, and it's called On Brighton Road. It's very short. It's a very simple sort of meeting a ghost on a road tale. Richard Middleton was an interesting chap. He died young. He suffered a great deal from melancholia or depression as we'd call it now, and he was being treated for his depression with chloroform, which is bizarre now, but he then overdosed on chloroform, which is how he took his own life. His most famous ghost story is called The Ghost Ship, and basically it's a storm, and a ghost ship lands in a village, and the ghosts of the village get a bit cross sometimes with the ghosts from the ship. It's got a nice end line, because from then on in the village all the turnips were flavored with rum. So it's that thing of the sort of two communities.
I mean, I'm not a turnip man, but I'm a rum man, so I give it a go. It might turn me on to turnips a bit more.
There's another one as well, which is Ambrose Bierce, which is called The Moonlit Roads, which is in this collection. And again, I get worried about reading about people who write ghost stories, because they always seem to end up having bizarre lives or bizarre deaths. My obscure but fascinating fact is that the writer of The Twilight Zone's The Hitchhiker from 1960 was written by Lucille Fletcher. But that story was originally done as a radio play back in the 1940s under the title of The Orson Welles Show. And it had a score, and the writer and guy who conducted that score with his orchestra was none other than Bernard Herrmann. But that isn't the interesting fact. What's the fascinating fact is that he was married at the time to Lucille Fletcher. I think you can find with horror movies, everything will go back to Psycho eventually. It's like 7 degrees of separation.
7 degrees
There'll always be a connection with Psycho.
So she's quite a pivotal figure then in some of the biggest horror films, books.
Yeah, I think
fiction of all time.
She has been not forgotten, but I think she's one of those writers who. I mean, there was a slight parody, I think, of the Hitchhiker that was made, but her name wasn't mentioned, and it really, should have been.
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
and I think that there's I mean, Roald Dahl talks about this in his book. Originally, when he put his book together and found all the good ghost stories, they were all by women, and he wanted to really make them all female writers at first,
right?
And then actually I think he found On the Brighton Road and thought, well, actually that's a really good story, I want to include that, and I'm going to include it on its merit. But there is a tradition, I think, that we that history, movies and literature sort of elbow out the way. I mean,
totally.
You can talk about it, the John Carpenter. And
well, I would call it like the Deborah Hill effect, in the sense of, certainly 70s and 80s, the success of those early John Carpenter films, the ones that we all return to and love, correlates to, yes, a fantastic group of creative people, but I think that female voice of Deborah Hill makes them 10, 15, 20, 25% better. From the characters in Halloween to the way characters interact, just feels authentic. I think she is. I'm not sure if we can say she's underappreciated by those who know who she is, but certainly she should always be mentioned very closely when those films are brought up, I think. So yeah, maybe Miss Fletcher and Deborah Hill are kind of like would have a bit of a kinship.
Probably would. Yeah, they probably would. Yeah. So what's your obscure but fascinating fact?
Well, I don't know if I can beat yours, but I'm not a competitive person, so it's fine. My obscure but fascinating fact is you can still go online and watch Annie Hardy's band car videos. They are eerily almost in some cases word for word the things that she says in the film. So if you enjoyed, and I know you were saying, Steve, about seeing the messages come up on screen and all that kind of, like, Bandcar is still there.
I think my takeaway from the story is that life can change in an instant, that somehow everything in your life can just come together in a focus, and you can make a decision that is going to alter where you go from there. And the story just uses a supernatural event to for that to happen. But I think those moments do occur in our lives, and we can, when you look back in your lives, you can sort of trace them. So I think my takeaway, as I say, is that life can change in an instant if you want it to.
Yeah, wow, and it's quite powerful, isn't it? Particularly because it's grounded in reality. We all at some point have to drive our cars, and often we find ourselves. I'll say, since I've been living out in the countryside, occasionally sat navs just stopped working, and I found myself in the fells somewhere with horses breathing on my car, and I've been absolutely petrified, and that's without scary strangers and supernatural goings on. So yeah, I guess it's that reality that scares us too, isn't it? It's not that far away from what we're actually encountering ourselves.
But he, in the story, he's open to. He could have driven past, but he chose to stop. And that sense that there was I think a willingness subconsciously for him to change. But as I say before, you can read it as a supernatural story, or you can read it as a psychological story. It's up to you.
And I think my final takeaway was the characterization in both your story and the film. How refreshing it was for me. Without, I don't want you to think I'm patting you on the back too hard. But that there's an element of characters that we are not supposed to like, with good reason, but they're engaging. That the more I dug into both, and some of the short stories that you paired with them as well, that people, are flawed, and it's great to see that in stories, and it's great to see that in all kinds of fiction.
In a slightly flippant sense, I don't mean to be too flippant. It did allow me to get one of the a pretty unpleasant joke, but sort of dark humor, where one of the characters around the dinner table is a doctor, and I think he's doing a line. He said, "Oh yes, one of my patients who's dying came in and wanted some advice," and I said, "Well, the best thing you can do is have a mud bath." And the patient says, "Will it stop me dying?" He said, "No, but you'll get used to the dirt."
So it's time to tease another episode of Steve Nallon's Ghost Stories.
Well, I'm not going to do the tease. I'm going to get Mr. Kenneth Williams to do the tease. Yes, oh yes, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see here, look, there she is, the wonderful, wonderful Hattie Jakes. And the story is Visiting Hattie. Oh, what a glorious fantabulosa story it is too.